The crystal champagne flute felt cool against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the simmering tension coiling in my stomach. Outside the grand arched window of the Venetian restaurant, gondolas drifted silently on the dark canal, moonlight shimmering on the water. Inside, candlelight flickered across the starched white tablecloth, illuminating the single red rose Mark had thoughtfully, or perhaps performatively, placed there. It was our fifth wedding anniversary, an occasion meant for romance, for reaffirming vows. Instead, it became the stage for the most pivotal betrayal of my life. Mark cleared his throat, breaking the strained silence. He didn't meet my eyes. "Emily," he began, his voice lacking its usual confident boom, replaced by a chilling flatness. "I can't do this anymore." My breath caught, but years of practice kept my expression neutral. "Do what? Pretend?" "There's someone else," he continued, finally looking up, his gaze cool, almost defiant. "Her name is Sarah, and, well, I'm done with this marriage. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The elegant dining room seemed to recede, the murmur of other diners fading into a dull roar in my ears. Another woman, his assistant, Sarah, the one I'd seen him laughing with a little too intimately at the last company gala. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My heart clenched, a physical pain spreading through my chest. But my hands didn't shake as I carefully set down my champagne flute. My voice didn't waver. "I understand," I said softly. Mark blinked, visibly surprised. He'd expected tears, accusations, perhaps a dramatic scene. My composure clearly threw him off script. He recovered quickly, leaning back with a semblance of his usual arrogance. "Look, I'm sorry it had to be this way," he offered, the apology sounding hollow. "But Sarah, she gets me. We're happy. Let's just handle this amicably, okay? Lawyers can sort out the finances. I'll be generous." Generous? With the fortune built on my family's legacy? With the assets funded by the inheritance he was blissfully unaware he'd just forfeited? A tiny, humorless smile touched my lips. "Of course, Mark. Amicable is always best." I paused, meeting his gaze directly. "But perhaps you should have your lawyer take a very close look at our prenuptial agreement before discussing generosity. Specifically, the addendum my grandfather insisted upon." Confusion flickered across his face, quickly masked by dismissal. He probably didn't even remember the clause, let alone its implications. He'd signed it 5 years ago with a wave of his hand, eager to get his hands on the lifestyle my family name represented, never bothering with the fine print. That oversight was about to cost him everything. It's strange how monumental decisions, clauses that dictate futures, can be treated so carelessly in the moment, only to loom large when the consequences arrive. His casual disregard for foresight was, in itself, a form of arrogance. The signs, of course, had been there for months, maybe longer, the late nights attributed to work that never reflected in his pay deposits. The sudden, secretive phone calls he'd take out on the balcony, his voice hushed. The obsessive new workout routine, the expensive clothes trying too hard to recapture his youth, clinging desperately to an image that no longer fit. The way he'd started using slang borrowed from interns, sounding absurd coming from a man in his mid-40s negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, or so he claimed. He was a walking midlife crisis cliché, desperately trying to outrun his own dissatisfaction by changing the scenery, the accessories, the woman beside him. 3 months ago, the real proof landed in my lap, not literally, but via encrypted email from the private investigator I'd reluctantly hired. My grandfather, a man forged in the cutthroat world of international business, had always warned me, "Emily, trust is earned, not given freely, especially when family fortunes are involved. Protect yourself. Sentiment is a luxury in business, and sometimes in marriage, too." His words echoed with chilling prescience when I found the first unexplained hotel charge on our credit card statement. A local boutique hotel, not some out-of-town business necessity. Hiring the PI felt like a betrayal in itself, a sordid admission that the foundation of our marriage was irrevocably cracked. But seeing the emailed photos, Mark and Sarah, laughing intimately, holding hands as they entered that hotel on a Tuesday afternoon he claimed was filled with back-to-back budget meetings, extinguished the last embers of my denial. The heartbreak was sharp, visceral, a physical ache, but beneath it, a cold resolve solidified, chilling the tears before they could fall. I didn't confront him then. What would have been the point? More lies? Feigned remorse? Instead, I called Mr. Harrison, my family's longtime lawyer, a man whose shrewdness and loyalty rivaled my grandfather's. We met in his oak-paneled office, the scent of old books and quiet power filling the air. We reviewed the prenuptial agreement, Clause 12. B. The fidelity addendum, shining under the lamplight like a hidden weapon. It was ironclad, a testament to my grandfather's foresight. Proven infidelity meant automatic forfeiture of any claim on my inherited assets. The substantial trust fund, the family properties scattered across the country, and, crucially, any controlling interest in the company established with seed money from that trust. He likely has no memory of this specific clause, Mr. Harrison had noted, polishing his spectacles. Men like Mark often suffer from selective memory when it suits them. His focus was always on the perceived access marriage would grant him, the lifestyle, the connections. He thinks the company is his, I'd replied bitterly, the words tasting like acid. He calls my involvement meddling, dismisses my insights. Then his own arrogance may be our greatest asset, Emily, Mr. Harrison advised, his voice calm and steadying. Gather your evidence meticulously, financial records, the investigator's reports, communication logs. But a direct admission, if you can provoke it without revealing your hand, would make the proceedings much cleaner, faster, and less emotionally taxing for you. And so I waited, playing a role I despised, the slightly distant, perhaps preoccupied, but ultimately trusting wife. Behind the facade, I became a meticulous archivist of his deceit. Every suspicious withdrawal, every coded text message I glimpsed over his shoulder, every flimsy excuse for a late night or a weekend conference. I opened a separate bank account under my maiden name at a different institution, painstakingly, quietly moving my personal savings, inheritance dividends, and the profits from my own small, independent investments. I left just enough in the joint accounts, a fluctuating balance consistent with regular household expenses and his claimed salary deposits, to avoid raising any red flags. Mark, blinded by the thrill of his affair and cocooned in his impenetrable ego, noticed nothing. He even suggested consolidating our accounts for simplicity a month ago, patting my hand and calling me adorably disorganized. I'd smiled sweetly, agreed cheerfully, and finalized the transfer of the last of my independent funds the next day. The account he would later boast about emptying contained only what I'd strategically, deliberately left behind for him to take. Bait in a trap he couldn't see. His anniversary trip suggestion, Venice, the supposed pinnacle of romance, had been the perfect, albeit deeply ironic opportunity. The stage was set. I suspected the confession was coming. His guilt, however shallow, mingled with his impatience and excitement about his new life, was making him reckless. And tonight, under the romantic guise of celebrating our past, he'd eagerly walked right into the meticulously laid trap designed to protect my future. So, Mark continued, completely oblivious to the tectonic shifts happening beneath my calm facade, his tone becoming almost businesslike. I'll move out tomorrow. Find a place with Sarah. She's found a great little condo downtown. We can get the divorce paperwork started next week. Keep it simple. He actually sounded relieved, lighter, as if he'd just successfully negotiated a merger, shedding dead weight. All right, Mark, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turbulent emotions swirling within. Whatever you think is best. I picked up my wine glass again, the crystal cool against my lips. To new beginnings, then? Yours, I mean. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, perhaps sensing the subtle barb, but eager to conclude the unpleasantness. He raised his glass. Yeah, new beginnings. The clink of our glasses felt like shattering ice. We finished the meal in a strained, almost unbearable silence. The food, undoubtedly exquisite, might as well have been cardboard. As we waited for the bill, my phone buzzed discreetly in my purse. A text from Mark, likely sent from the restroom during one of his frequent breaks. Don't make this difficult, Emily. Be reasonable. You knew we were growing apart. Reasonable. He expected reason after detonating our marriage. I didn't reply. Instead, under the table, I forwarded it to Mr. Harrison with a simple coded note. Phase 1 complete. Confession secured. Proceed as planned. The next morning, Mark was practically whistling as he packed his expensive suitcases into the back of a waiting taxi. He seemed lighter, almost buoyant, freed from a burden. "You'll be okay, Em," he said, attempting a final condescending pat on my shoulder, which I subtly evaded. "You've got your little projects, your charities. They'll keep you busy. And the house is big enough for you for now." My house. The sprawling stone manor inherited directly from my grandmother, kept solely in my name, legally untouchable by him, despite his numerous suggestions over the years to add him to the deed for estate planning purposes. Another lucky instinct, another piece of my grandfather's wisdom manifesting as protection. His casual assumption of control, even now, was breathtaking in its audacity. "I'll send professional movers for the rest of my things later," he added, grabbing his designer briefcase. "Don't worry about the legal stuff. My lawyer will send yours the standard settlement paperwork. Very fair, very standard." He blew me a theatrical kiss and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him with an air of finality, severing the last thread of the life we had built, or rather, the life I had funded and he had enjoyed. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just a profound, chilling clarity. I made coffee, strong and black, and called Mr. Harrison. "He's gone," I said, my voice even, "and he's under the impression he's won." "Excellent," Mr. Harrison replied, his tone crisp and professional. His lawyer, a rather junior associate it seems, contacted me this morning with a ridiculously optimistic settlement proposal. Standard boilerplate demanding 50% of everything. Liquid assets, property value appreciation, projected future earnings of the company, significant lifelong alimony. They clearly haven't read the prenup, or perhaps Mark neglected to provide them with Addendum B. "Let them proceed," I instructed calmly. "We respond only when they file formally with the court. Let him bask in his perceived victory for a little while longer." Mark's confidence, fueled by ignorance, manifested as a flurry of texts over the next few days, sent from his new number. Smug updates on his blissful new life with Sarah. "She really understands ambition, Em." Photos of them grinning in trendy restaurants, paid for, I suspected, with money funneled from company accounts before I could lock them down. And not-so-subtle reminders about the fair and standard divorce settlement he expected me to sign without fuss. Then came the text I'd almost been waiting for, the final nail in his financial coffin. "BTW, had to empty the joint account for our deposit and moving expenses for the new condo. Just giving you a heads up so you don't bounce any checks. LOL. LOL." He actually typed LOL after admitting to draining our shared finances for his new life with his mistress. The sheer, unadulterated gall was stunning. I screenshotted it immediately, timestamp and all, and sent it straight to Mr. Harrison. "Exhibit A for financial misconduct," I typed. His response was swift. "Perfect." This, combined with the infidelity admission witnessed in Venice, triggers Clause 12B unequivocally and demonstrates clear financial malfeasance. We can file for an emergency hearing immediately to freeze all known assets and accounts he might still have access to. The legal machinery, once engaged, moved with surprising speed. Mark and Sarah were apparently planning a celebratory escape trip to the Caribbean. First-class, five-star resort, naturally. Booked, as suspected, on a corporate platinum card linked to a subsidiary account I technically controlled as the primary investor via the family trust. Following Mr. Harrison's precise instructions, I contacted the bank's corporate fraud department, providing Mark's text message about emptying the joint account as supporting evidence of his pattern of unauthorized use of funds for personal gain with his paramour. The charges were investigated and swiftly reversed, the first-class tickets voided, the luxury hotel reservation canceled. Mark's subsequent texts shifted dramatically in tone, evolving from smug to confused, then rapidly escalating to outright fury. What happened to the flight booking? The airline is saying the tickets are invalid. Did you cancel the corporate card, Emily? What the hell is wrong with you? That was a business trip. A blatant lie, easily disproven. Answer me. You're doing this deliberately to ruin things out of spite. You vindictive witch. I silenced my phone, a grim satisfaction settling in. Vindictive. Number prepared. I turned my attention back to reviewing the quarterly reports for the company Mark thought he ran single-handedly. His mismanagement, particularly his blatant habit of blurring personal luxuries with business expenses, lavish dinners, designer client gifts that suspiciously matched Sarah's taste, unexplained consulting fees, was even more apparent now that I was looking closely without the filter of misplaced affection. He'd been sloppy, arrogant, utterly convinced of his own untouchability and my passive compliance. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Mark arrived looking flustered and distinctly less polished, his designer clothes slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. Sarah, interestingly, was not with him this time. His lawyer, a more senior but equally harried-looking man, likely hired in a panic after the junior associate fumbled, seemed woefully unprepared for the mountain of meticulously organized evidence Mr. Harrison presented. Clause 12B of the prenup, highlighted and annotated, witness statements from the Venice dinner, the text admitting to emptying the account, the documentation of the reversed credit card charges for the canceled trip, printouts of Mark's own boastful social media posts with Sarah, tagged incredibly during supposed work hours, and the pièce de résistance, preliminary forensic accounting findings indicating significant financial irregularities and potential misappropriation of funds from the company accounts under Mark's management. Your Honor, Mark's lawyer stammered, shuffling papers nervously, my client admits he acted rashly, perhaps inappropriately, under considerable emotional strain. Emotional strain? Mr. Harrison cut in smoothly, his voice resonating with quiet authority in the hushed courtroom. Or calculated financial misconduct coupled with admitted infidelity, directly violating multiple clauses of a mutually signed, legally binding prenuptial agreement. He then methodically presented the complex documentation outlining the Harrison family trust's unambiguous ownership of the company's controlling shares and the specific, conditional terms tied to Mark's limited role as managing partner, contingent explicitly on fidelity and fiduciary responsibility. The judge, a stern-faced woman renowned for her meticulousness and intolerance for financial gamesmanship, reviewed the presented documents with unnerving impassivity. She then fixed her gaze on Mark, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Mr. Hayes? I had legally reverted to my maiden name, Harrison, the day after he moved out. You admit, via text message presented as Exhibit A, to deliberately emptying a joint marital account after informing your wife of your intention to divorce due to an extramarital affair. You also attempted to use corporate funds belonging to a company majority owned by your wife's family trust for personal travel with your paramour, correct? Mark flushed a deep, ugly red. It was complicated. It was money I earned through my hard work. Money earned while managing a company funded by and majority owned by your wife's family trust, under specific contractual terms you agreed to in this document. The judge countered sharply, holding up the signed prenup, her finger pointing directly at Clause 12B. The terms regarding forfeiture in the event of infidelity seem quite clear and unambiguous, as does the evidence of said infidelity and subsequent financial misappropriation presented today. The verdict was swift and brutal. All assets Mark might conceivably have argued were marital or had a claim to were frozen pending the final divorce decree. He was ordered, under penalty of contempt, to return the funds removed from the joint account within 48 hours, funds the court knew he'd likely already spent. His access to all company accounts, credit lines, and facilities was immediately and permanently revoked. He was, for all intents and purposes, financially neutered. I watched the spectrum of emotions play across Mark's face: disbelief, sputtering rage, and finally, the dawning, sickening realization of his absolute ruin. The color drained completely, leaving him looking pale and suddenly much older. He looked utterly stunned, lost, like a gambler who'd bet the house on a bluff only to be called. He thought he held all the cards, the winning hand. Instead, he'd folded spectacularly with a losing hand he had never even bothered to read properly. As we left the courtroom into the harsh sunlight, I saw him slumping onto a nearby bench, head buried in his hands. For a fleeting, fractional moment, I felt a sliver of something akin to pity. But then I remembered his casual cruelty, his dismissive arrogance, his laughter, LOL, in that text message, his utter disregard for the life, the trust, the years we had shared. Pity vanished instantly, replaced by a quiet, firm, almost serene sense of justice having been served. My grandfather, I felt certain, would have approved. The months following the emergency hearing dissolved into a blur of legal finalizations and the systematic process of taking back full, unequivocal control. Mark's desperate, last-ditch attempts to fight the prenup were predictably futile. His flimsy claims that he'd somehow spiritually co-founded the company, or that his moral support constituted a tangible investment, were easily dismantled by the clear, cold financial records showing the initial investment and ongoing capital support came entirely solely from the Harrison Family Trust. His increasingly desperate lawyer eventually advised him to accept the inevitable, likely trying to cut his own losses. The divorce was finalized precisely 6 months after that disastrous anniversary dinner in Venice. Mark walked away with only his personal belongings, most of which were purchased with money I now knew was siphoned from the business. His aging leased car, and a crushing mountain of personal debt accumulated trying to impress Sarah and maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford. He received absolutely nothing from my substantial inheritance, nothing from the thriving company, nothing tangible from our shared life. Exactly as stipulated word for word in Clause 12B, the fine print he ignored had become his epitaph. I heard through the reluctant grapevine, mostly pitying whispers from former mutual acquaintances, that Sarah had vanished from his life almost immediately after his assets were frozen and the corporate cards canceled. Apparently, the stark reality of dating a broke, disgraced, and increasingly bitter older man living temporarily in a budget motel wasn't the glamorous adventure she had signed up for. The allure faded quickly without the lubrication of luxury. Last I heard, Mark had been forced to retreat, tail between his legs, to his parents' suburban basement, a far cry from the penthouse condo he'd envisioned sharing with Sarah. He was humbled, furious, and characteristically blaming everyone but himself. Me, Sarah, the judge, his lawyers, even his parents for not bailing him out unconditionally. I, on the other hand, thrived in the vacuum his departure created. Taking full, unfettered control of the company felt less like a burden and more like stepping into my birthright. I swiftly replaced Mark's incompetent cronies, hired more for loyalty to him than actual skill, with competent, experienced professionals. We streamlined operations, implemented transparent accounting practices, and meticulously corrected the financial irregularities and wasteful spending patterns Mark had instituted. Within a year, profits were up a staggering 30%, exceeding even my own optimistic projections. I rediscovered my own business acumen, the sharp instincts and strategic thinking inherited directly from my grandfather, qualities Mark had always belittled or dismissed as interfering. Life settled into a new, more peaceful rhythm. I cautiously reconnected with old friends Mark had subtly steered me away from, deeming them unsuitable or not ambitious enough. I traveled again, not frantically escaping as he had planned, but deliberately exploring, rediscovering parts of myself I'd suppressed during my marriage. I poured my energy into the business, finding deep, genuine satisfaction in its ethical growth, improving Mark, and perhaps even a younger version of myself, wrong about my capabilities. Occasionally, I'd receive a bitter, rambling email forwarded by Mr. Harrison, Mark, still tilting at windmills, blaming me for his self-inflicted downfall. I instructed Mr. Harrison to filter them. I never replied. Mark's reality, his bitterness, was no longer my concern. My focus was forward. 3 years. Post-divorce. The European expansion I oversaw was a resounding success, exceeding all initial targets. We were now scouting locations in Asia, planning the next phase of global growth. The Harrison Trust Industries, under my stewardship, were becoming a recognized name in our sector, synonymous with quality and integrity. My personal life found a quiet equilibrium. I wasn't actively seeking romance, but I wasn't closed off to it either. I found fulfillment in mentoring young female entrepreneurs, sharing the hard-won lessons about financial independence and protecting one's vision. I established a small foundation in my grandfather's name, offering scholarships to women pursuing business degrees. News of Mark, when it trickled in, was invariably bleak. His attempt to launch a flashy online consultancy, likely funded by a loan reluctantly co-signed by his parents, had imploded within 6 months due to his lack of discipline and inability to manage finances. He'd apparently tried online dating, but women his own age were wary of a man in his late 40s living in his parents' basement with a cloud of financial scandal hanging over him. Younger women, likely warned off by the still circulating office gossip about his history with Sarah, steered clear. He was increasingly isolated. I heard from his sister, Amanda, during a brief, awkward encounter at a charity gala, that he was dealing with stress-related health issues, high blood pressure, anxiety. He refused to take responsibility, still weaving elaborate narratives where he was the victim of my vindictiveness and corporate backstabbing. It was a sad, pathetic trajectory, but one entirely of his own making. Seeing his downfall didn't bring me joy, only a profound sense of melancholy for the potential he had squandered through arrogance and betrayal. Life has a way of holding up a mirror, and Mark clearly didn't like his reflection. 5 years! It felt like a lifetime ago that I sat in that Venetian restaurant, my world collapsing. Now, my world was bigger, brighter, and entirely my own. The company was a leader in its field, winning prestigious industry awards. The Harrison Foundation had helped dozens of young women launch their careers. I had found a quiet contentment, a sense of peace I hadn't realized was possible. I had good friends, fulfilling work, the freedom to shape my own destiny. Mark, according to the infrequent updates I couldn't entirely avoid, had hit rock bottom. His parents had finally insisted he move out of their basement after another failed get-rich-quick scheme, cryptocurrency this time, predictably disastrous. He was reportedly working a low-wage retail job, struggling to make rent on a small, dingy apartment in a less desirable part of town. His health issues had apparently worsened. He looked defeated, much older than his actual age, a ghost of the confident man who had charmed me years ago. Sarah, I heard, was married, moderately successful in her own career, and wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, refusing even to acknowledge him if they crossed paths. One crisp autumn afternoon, while walking through a downtown park near my new headquarters, I saw him, across the expanse of green lawn, sitting alone on a bench, feeding pigeons. He looked shabby, hunched, lost in thoughts that were likely bitter. Our eyes met for a brief second across the distance. There was no flicker of recognition in his, or perhaps he chose not to acknowledge me. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of detachment, like looking at a stranger whose story I once knew but no longer felt connected to. I turned and walked away, towards my gleaming office building, towards my future. Forgiveness is a complex thing. I don't know if I've forgiven Mark for the betrayal, for the lies, for the pain he caused. Perhaps forgiveness isn't the right word. Acceptance, maybe. Acceptance that it happened, that it shaped me, but that it no longer defines me. My grandfather taught me about calculated risks in business. Mark taught me about the uncalculated risks of the heart and the importance of emotional prenuptials, guarding your core self. The legacy I was building wasn't about revenge, it was about resilience. It was about proving that a woman scorned doesn't have to be a victim. She can be the architect of her own, even more magnificent future. The company's success, the foundation's impact, my own peace of mind. These were the dividends of foresight, hard work, and an unwavering belief in my own worth, rekindled from the ashes of betrayal. Mark thought he was ending my story that night in Venice. He never realized he was just clearing the stage for my true beginning,